The mining colony of Kepler, Pair 442b, had been a model of interspecies cooperation for over 2 decades. Humans, Altairians, and even a few crystalline entities worked side by side in the vast titanium deposits that honeycombed the planet's crust. Dr. Sarah Chen had overseen the operation since its inception, watching her small outpost grow into a thriving community of nearly 50,000 beings. The attack came without warning on a Tuesday morning, local time. Sarah was reviewing extraction reports in her office when the first explosions shook the administrative complex. Through her reinforced windows, she watched sleek, predatory ships descend from the amber sky like metal vultures. Their hulls bore the crimson markings of the Zephyrian hegemony, slavers who had been growing bolder in recent months, testing the boundaries of civilized space. "Emergency protocols activated," announced the colony's AI, as alarms wailed throughout the complex. "All personnel to designated safe zones. This is not a drill." But Sarah knew there were no safe zones from the Zephyrians. They didn't come for minerals or territory. They came for bodies. Intelligent beings to fuel their grotesque markets in the galactic underworld. Her hand trembling, she reached for the emergency communication array. The first wave of Zephyrian shock troops burst through the complex's main entrance as Sarah's fingers danced across the quantum transmitter. These weren't the sleek, diplomatic Zephyrians she'd encountered in trade negotiations. These were their warrior caste. 7-foot-tall reptilian humanoids with serrated claws and eyes like chips of black ice. Their armor seemed to absorb light, making them appear as living shadows against the sterile walls of the administration building. "Stand down, warm blood," hissed their leader in heavily accented Standard Galactic. "Resistance will only increase your market value as exotic stock." Sarah's blood ran cold. Exotic stock. The term the slavers used for species they considered particularly valuable due to their perceived resilience or unique physiology. Humans, with their Deathworld adaptations and psychological fortitude, commanded premium prices in the black markets. Behind her, the quantum transmitter hummed to life. Without looking away from the Zephyrian commander, her fingers found the emergency broadcast controls. The ones every human colony administrator knew by heart but prayed they'd never have to use. "I said stand down." The Zephyrian raised what appeared to be a neural disruptor, its crystalline core glowing with malevolent energy. Sarah smiled grimly and pressed the final sequence. The transmission burst outward at faster-than-light speeds, carrying with it authentication codes that hadn't been used in 3 centuries. Ancient satellites in deep space received the signal and began their automated responses, awakening systems that had slumbered since the end of the Covenant Wars. The neural disruptor's beam caught Sarah in the chest and she collapsed as her nervous system went haywire. But through the haze of artificial agony, she heard the sweetest sound in the universe, the confirmation tone that meant her message had been received and authenticated. "Foolish creature," the Zephyrian commander growled, stepping over her twitching form. "Your pathetic colonies have been abandoned by your kind. No help will come." If Sarah could have laughed, she would have. Instead, she managed to whisper through paralyzed lips, "You have no idea what you've just awakened." The Zephyrian ignored her, turning to coordinate with his troops as they began the systematic capture of the colony's inhabitants. Standard procedure called for the harvesting of any species with sufficient intelligence to work in the labor markets or exotic enough to appeal to the hegemony's more perverse clientele. The Altarians, with their gossamer wings and empathic abilities, would fetch high prices from collectors. The crystalline entities, beings of living mineral that could interface directly with quantum technology, were worth their weight in rare metals. But it was the humans the Zephyrians prized most, Deathworlders. Beings evolved on a planet so hostile that they had developed redundant organ systems, dense bone structure, and psychological resilience that bordered on the insane. The galaxy's elite paid fortunes for human slaves, not just for their physical capabilities, but for their entertainment value. Watching a Deathworlder face impossible odds was considered the ultimate sport among certain circles. Within hours, the colony had been systematically stripped of its population. The Zephyrians worked with cold efficiency, their cargo ships filling with terrified beings destined for lives of servitude across the galaxy. The few who resisted were dealt with swiftly, neural disruptors leaving them paralyzed but alive. Damaged merchandise was worth less than intact specimens. As the last of the transport ships lifted off from Kepler, 442b, carrying away everything that had once made the colony a beacon of cooperation and hope, the planet fell silent. Only the automated mining equipment continued its work, oblivious to the tragedy that had unfolded above. But something else was stirring in the depths of space. The distress signal Sarah had transmitted continued its journey through the quantum communications network, passing through relay stations that had been maintained by automated systems for 300 years. Each relay authenticated the signal against archives so old they predated the current galactic political structure. The signal reached the edge of what was once called the Terran Defense Sphere, a region of space that stretched across 47 star systems and had once been the beating heart of human civilization. Most species believed this region to be empty now, that humanity had retreated inward, abandoning their expansionist dreams for a life of quiet isolation on their core worlds. They were wrong. In the shadow of the red dwarf star designated Wolf 359, a massive structure began to respond to Sarah's desperate transmission. The Citadel had been humanity's greatest achievement during the Covenant Wars, a mobile command base the size of a small moon, equipped with manufacturing facilities that could build entire fleets and defensive systems that had never been breached. For 3 centuries, it had waited in the darkness between stars, its crew in cryogenic suspension, its AI systems monitoring the galaxy with the patience of the truly immortal. The Terran Defense Grid's emergency protocols were clear: maintain watch, preserve the peace, but do not act unless called upon. Today, they had been called upon. Admiral Marcus Torres felt the familiar chill of cryogenic revival as consciousness slowly returned to his enhanced nervous system. Around him, 10,000 of humanity's finest began the awakening process. Soldiers, engineers, pilots, and specialists who had volunteered to sleep in the darkness until their people needed them again. Status report, Torres commanded as his vision cleared, and the revival chamber's medical systems confirmed his successful transition from suspended animation. Emergency transmission received and authenticated, replied AEGIS, the Citadel's primary AI. Origin, Mining Colony Kepler, 442b. Authentication codes match Terran Defense Protocol 77 Alpha. This is not a drill. Torres sat up slowly, his enhanced physiology already adapting to normal function despite 3 centuries of sleep. Around him, the command center of the Citadel was coming alive, holographic displays flickering to existence, tactical stations powering up, communication arrays reaching across space to contact other hidden installations. Analysis of the transmission, AGIS. Colony administrators report coordinated attack by Zephyrian hegemony forces. Estimated 50,000 civilians taken into slavery. Attack pattern suggests this is part of a larger operation targeting rim colonies. Torres closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the familiar weight of command settle on his shoulders. When he opened them again, they held the cold fire that had earned him his reputation during the Covenant Wars. Wake the fleets, AEGIS. All of them. Sir, current intelligence suggests the galaxy has maintained relative peace for the past 3 centuries. A full mobilization might be seen as AEGIS, Torres interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had once held the line against extinction itself. They took our people. They made them slaves. They thought we were weak, that we had abandoned our own. He stood, his tall frame casting shadows in the command center's ambient light. It's time to remind the galaxy why they used to fear the sight of human ships on their sensors. Understood, Admiral. Initiating Fleet Awakening Protocol. Estimated time to full readiness, 72 hours. But Torres was already moving, his mind calculating distances, ship movements, and the cold mathematics of retribution. 72 hours to wake 10,000 ships. 72 hours to assemble the largest military force the galaxy had seen since the Covenant Wars. 72 hours to prepare for humanity's return to the stars. As the Citadel's vast manufacturing bays began their awakening sequences and long-dormant shipyards powered up their construction matrices, Admiral Torres stood before the great viewing port that looked out into the void. Somewhere out there, 50,000 innocents suffered in chains, believing themselves abandoned. They were wrong. Humanity never abandoned its own. The sleeping giant was stirring, and when it fully awakened, the galaxy would tremble. The Zephyrian slave market on Tartarus Prime was considered one of the most profitable enterprises in the outer spiral arm. Built into the hollowed remains of an ancient asteroid, the facility processed millions of beings annually, sorting them by species, capability, and market value, before distributing them across the galaxy's less savory trade routes. Overlord Vextac stood on the observation deck overlooking the processing floor, his scaled hide gleaming under the facility's harsh artificial lighting. Below him, the latest shipment from the Rim colonies was being catalogued with mechanical precision. Altairians were separated into empathic and non-empathic categories. Crystalline entities were tested for quantum interface capability, and the humans were special. Magnificent specimens, hissed his lieutenant, Kreshvar, as she consulted her datapad. 47 adult Deathworlders, pristine condition. Initial market assessment suggests a value of 12 million credits per unit for standard labor classes, with potential for exponential increase if any possess military training. Vexthak's obsidian eyes gleamed with avarice. Deathworlders were the crown jewel of the slave trade, being so physically and mentally resilient that they could survive conditions that would kill most species, yet intelligent enough to be trained for complex tasks. The fact that these particular specimens came from a peaceful mining colony made them even more valuable. Untrained Deathworlders fetched premium prices from buyers who enjoyed the process of breaking them in. Have any of them been processed for compliance conditioning? Vexthak asked, referring to the neural modification procedure that made slaves more docile and obedient.
Not yet, Overlord.
The harvesting team brought them in raw. They wanted you to examine them personally before any alterations. Vexthak nodded approvingly. Unmodified Deathworlders were incredibly dangerous, but they were also worth exponentially more to the right buyers. There were collectors throughout the galaxy who paid fortunes for the opportunity to own a completely unbroken human, viewing the gradual process of psychological domination as the ultimate expression of power. On the processing floor below, the humans were being held in individual containment cells designed specifically for their species. The cells used a combination of neural inhibitors and gravitational manipulation to keep the Deathworlders subdued without causing permanent damage. Even so, Vexthak could see the defiance burning in their eyes as they watched their captors with predatory calculation. This one, Kreshvar indicated a middle-aged human female with graying hair and intelligent eyes. Sarah Chen, colonial administrator, she led the resistance during the harvesting operation. Preliminary scans suggest enhanced neural pathways consistent with advanced education. She could fetch 30 million credits from the right academic collection. Sarah Chan. Vexthak had heard about her from the harvesting team leader, the human who had somehow activated an ancient communication system before being subdued. Whatever signal she had sent had died in the void. The hegemony's intelligence network had detected no unusual activity in human space. Yet something about the woman's confident demeanor suggested she knew something they didn't. Bring her to Interrogation Chamber 7, Vexthak commanded. I want to know exactly what she transmitted, and to whom. As Kreshvar moved to comply, alarms began wailing throughout the facility. Emergency lighting bathed the processing floor in crimson shadows as automated defense systems activated. Vexthak's head snapped up toward the tactical displays that materialized around the observation deck. Report, he snarled. Unknown contacts detected at the system's edge, announced the facility's AI. Configuration, Overlord. We're reading massive energy signatures. Whatever's out there, it's big. The main display flickered to life, showing the outer reaches of the Tartarus system. At first, there was nothing visible except the distant glow of the system's dying red dwarf star. Then, as the sensors adjusted their parameters, shapes began to emerge from the cosmic background radiation. Ships. Hundreds of them. Vexthak felt his blood chill as the tactical display resolved the contacts into recognizable silhouettes. These weren't the sleek organic curves of Zephyrian vessels, or the geometric precision of Altarian craft. These ships were angular, aggressive, built for war rather than aesthetics. Their hulls appeared to absorb sensor energy, making them difficult to track and analyze. Configuration analysis complete, the AI announced with what almost sounded like nervousness. Fleet composition suggests, Overlord, these appear to be Terran Defense Force vessels. But that's impossible. The humans retreated from active space operations 3 centuries ago. Impossible or not, they're here, Vexthak growled, his claws extending involuntarily as stress pheromones flooded his system. How many ships? Scanning, Overlord. I'm reading over 200 capital-class vessels, plus an unknown number of smaller craft. The formation suggests a full battle fleet with support elements. 200 capital ships. Vexthak's mind reeled at the implications. The entire Zephyrian navy numbered fewer than 300 vessels, and those were spread across dozens of systems. This single human fleet represented more firepower than most species possessed in their entirety. On the processing floor below, Dr. Sarah Chen had somehow managed to position herself where she could see the tactical displays. Despite the neural inhibitors suppressing her motor functions, Vexthak could see her lips moving in what appeared to be a countdown. 5, 4, 2, 1. The main communication array crackled to life, filled with a transmission that made Vexthak's scales crawl. The voice was human, male, mature, with the kind of authority that could only come from commanding others in life or death situations. Zephyrian Facility Designation Tartarus Prime. This is Admiral Marcus Torres of the Terran Defense Force. You are in possession of stolen human civilians and citizens of allied species taken in violation of interstellar law. You have exactly 1 hour to release all prisoners and surrender yourselves for processing. Vexthak found his voice after a moment of stunned silence. This is Overlord Vexthak of the Zephyrian Hegemony. You have no jurisdiction in this system, humans. Your people abandoned these stars long ago. The response came without hesitation, carried on a transmission beam so powerful it overrode every communication system in the facility. Overlord Vexthak, I want to be very clear about something. We didn't abandon these stars. We've been watching them, protecting them, waiting for someone to be stupid enough to take our people. On the tactical display, the human fleet was moving into attack formation with precision that spoke of centuries of training and preparation. Each ship took its assigned position in a complex three-dimensional matrix that would allow for maximum firepower concentration while minimizing friendly fire casualties. You've made a mistake, Torres continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. A mistake so profound that your civilization will remember this day as the moment they learned why humans are called Deathworlders. You took 50,000 innocent beings from Kepler. 442b. You made them slaves. You thought we wouldn't notice, wouldn't care, wouldn't respond. The fleet was accelerating now, their engines leaving trails of blue fire across the void. But it wasn't just their speed that terrified Vexthak, it was their discipline. These ships moved like parts of a single organism, each vessel perfectly coordinated with its neighbors in a display of tactical precision he had never seen before. You were wrong, Torres said simply. We notice everything. We care about everyone under our protection. And when someone hurts our own, we respond with the full fury of a species that crawled out of hell and decided to make the universe our home. Vexthak's lieutenant was frantically working at a tactical console, trying to raise the facility's defenses. Overlord, I'm reading massive energy buildups across the human fleet. Their weapon systems are powering up. Defensive measures, Vexthak snarled. Activate the orbital platforms, scramble our fighters, prepare the facility's artillery grid. But even as the orders left his mouth, he knew they were futile. Tartarus Prime's defenses were designed to deter raiders and pirates, not repel a full-scale military assault by one of the galaxy's most feared warrior species. On the processing floor, Dr. Bayao, Sarah Chen was smiling. The human fleet reached weapons range with terrifying speed, their ships' advanced engines allowing them to decelerate from near relativistic velocities with impossible precision. The leading elements of the formation were massive dreadnoughts, their hulls bristling with weapon emplacements that had no parallel in current galactic military technology. Overlord Vexthak. Admiral Torres's voice filled the facility once more. Your hour has become 30 minutes. I suggest you use that time to begin releasing our people, because when my ships open fire, we won't be aiming to disable your facility. We'll be aiming to vaporize it. You wouldn't dare! Vexthak found himself shouting at the communication array. There are thousands of beings in this facility. Your own people are here.
Yes.
Torres replied, and for the first time his voice carried emotion, a cold fury that made Vexthak's blood freeze. Our people are there, which is exactly why we're going to take them back. All of them. Every single being you've stolen from their homes and families. On the tactical display, smaller ships were detaching from the main fleet, fast attack craft and boarding vessels that moved with predatory grace through the void. These weren't coming to negotiate. They were coming to take back what had been stolen. And Overlord, Torres added, his voice carrying the promise of retribution across the void. When we're done here, we're going to follow your supply chains. Every ship, every facility, every market where our people have been sold, we're going to find them all. The first wave of human attack craft reached Tartarus Prime's outer defenses, and the void erupted in fire. But it wasn't the desperate defense of an outmatched facility that lit up the darkness. It was the systematic dismantling of everything the Zephyrians had built. The Deathworlders had returned to the stars, and they had brought hell with them. The assault on Tartarus Prime lasted exactly 17 minutes and 34 seconds. When it was over, the asteroid facility hung broken in space, its defensive systems reduced to drifting debris, and its slave processing chambers breached by human boarding parties who moved through the corridors like unstoppable forces of nature. Captain Elena Vasquez led the primary rescue team through the facility's lower levels, her power armor's sensors painting detailed maps of the complex as her squad advanced. Behind her, Sergeants Kim and Okafor moved with the fluid precision of soldiers who had trained together for decades, their weapons tracking potential threats while their enhanced physiology processed the horror around them. The processing levels were a testament to organized cruelty. Row upon row of containment cells held beings from across the galaxy. Some species Elena recognized, others she'd never seen before. All of them bore the vacant expressions of souls pushed beyond their breaking point. "Recovery Team Alpha, this is Vasquez," she reported into her comm unit. "We've got approximately 2,000 beings on level 7 alone. Medical teams are going to be working overtime." "Copy that, Captain," came the response from Admiral Torres aboard the command ship. "Prioritize the critically injured and begin immediate psychological evaluation. Some of these people have been here for years. Years." Elena felt her jaw clench at the thought. The Zephyrian slave trade had been operating for decades, maybe longer, while the galaxy turned a blind eye to their atrocities. The human retreat from active galactic politics had been seen as weakness by species like the hegemony, an invitation to expand their operations without fear of reprisal. They had been catastrophically wrong. "Captain!" Sergeant Kim's voice crackled through the comm. "I found the humans from Kepler 442b. They're in the high-security section, level 5. Elena's team double-timed through the facility's corridors, past the smoking ruins of Zephyrian defensive positions and the bodies of slavers who had chosen to fight rather than surrender. The human forces had offered quarter, as per Terran military doctrine, but many of the hegemony troops had believed their own propaganda about Deathworlder savagery and expected no mercy. The high-security section was a maze of individual cells designed to hold the most valuable or dangerous specimens. Each cell was a marvel of containment technology. Gravitational fields, neural dampeners, and atmospheric controls that could be adjusted for different species' needs. It was also a monument to the Zephyrians' complete disregard for basic sapient rights. Dr. Sarah Chen was in Cell 47A, her body held immobile by the neural inhibitors, but her eyes tracking Elena's approach with laser-like focus. The moment Elena's technical specialist disabled the containment field, Sarah lurched forward, her muscles cramping from hours of forced paralysis. "Admiral Torres?" Sarah gasped, her voice hoarse but filled with desperate hope. "Safe and very much alive," Elena assured her, helping the older woman to her feet. "He's commanding the fleet that just liberated this facility." "You did good, Doc. Your signal reached exactly the right people." Sarah's laugh was equal parts relief and hysteria. "I wasn't sure anyone was still listening to those old frequencies. The emergency protocols were installed so long ago. The Terran Defense Force never stops listening," Elena replied, supporting Sarah as they moved toward the exit. "We've been watching, waiting, protecting. People just forgot we were there." As they made their way through the facility, Elena's comm unit came alive with reports from other rescue teams. The scope of the Zephyrian operation was staggering. Nearly 50,000 beings held in various stages of processing, representing dozens of species from across the galactic rim. "Captain Vasquez, this is Medical Team 7. Came a voice Elena recognized as Dr. Marcus Reed, the fleet's chief xenobiologist. "We've got a problem down here in the experimental section. You need to see this." Elena felt her stomach drop. The experimental section could only mean one thing. The Zephyrians hadn't been content with simple slavery. They'd been conducting research. She delegated Sarah's care to Sergeant Okafor and made her way to the facility's lower levels, where Dr. Reed was examining what appeared to be a series of surgical chambers. Each room contained specialized equipment designed for different species' physiology, and the computers held detailed records of procedures that made Elena's enhanced nervous system flood with combat stimulants. "They were trying to create enhanced slaves," Dr. Reed explained, his usually calm demeanor cracked by professional outrage. "Neural modification, genetic tampering, psychological conditioning programs that would make the old Earth dictatorships look humanitarian by comparison." Elena studied the data displays, her military training helping her pass the clinical language into its horrifying reality. The Zephyrians hadn't just been stealing beings, they'd been trying to create perfect servants, stripping away everything that made their victims individuals.
How many?
She asked quietly. "Nearly 300 subjects in various stages of modification," Reed replied. "Some of the procedures can be reversed, but others, Captain, some of these people may never fully recover from what was done to them." Elena's comm unit chirped with an incoming message from Admiral Torres. "Captain Vasquez, report to the command level. We have visitors." The facility's command level had been converted into a temporary command post, with human technicians working alongside the fleet's AI specialists to download the Zephyrian databases. Admiral Torres stood at the center of the organized chaos, his presence lending calm authority to the rescue operation. But it wasn't Torres who drew Elena's attention. It was the delegation of non-human beings standing near the main tactical display. She recognized them immediately from her xenocultural training. Altarian Trade Council representative, a crystalline collective interface node, and what appeared to be an ambassador from the Galactic Cooperation Treaty Organization. "Captain," Torres said as Elena approached, "allow me to introduce Ambassador Zethara of the Altarian Trade Council, node resonance of Crystal Song from the Collective, and Administrator Pelmoth from the GCT. They've come to discuss the situation." Elena could hear the careful neutrality in Torres's voice, but she could also see the tension in his posture. These were politicians, arriving in the aftermath of violence to manage the diplomatic fallout. "Admiral Torres," Ambassador Zethara spoke with the melodious tones of her species, her gossamer wings flickering with nervous energy. "The Trade Council wishes to express our gratitude for your intervention. However, we must discuss the implications of your return to active galactic politics." Torres's expression didn't change, but Elena had served under him long enough to recognize the warning signs. "What implications, Ambassador?" The Terran Defense Force's withdrawal from galactic affairs 3 centuries ago was seen as a stabilizing influence, Administrator Pelmoth interjected. "Your sudden reappearance, particularly in such overwhelming force, has caused considerable concern among the galactic community." Elena felt her hand drift toward her sidearm, an unconscious reaction to what sounded suspiciously like a threat. Torres's gesture stopped her, but she could see similar reactions among the other human personnel in the command center. "Administrator," Torres said with the patience of a man explaining basic physics to a child, 50,000 innocent beings were kidnapped from their homes and sold into slavery. The Zephyrian hegemony has been operating a massive criminal enterprise for decades, while your galactic community turned a blind eye. We responded to a legitimate distress call and executed a lawful rescue operation. But the scale of your response," Ambassador Zethara began, "was proportionate to the threat," Torres cut her off. "The Zephyrians had military-grade defenses, a fleet of armed vessels, and were actively engaged in crimes against sapience. Did you expect us to send a diplomatic note?" Node resonance of Crystal Song's artificial voice carried harmonics of confusion. The galactic community believed humanity had abandoned its expansionist phase. "Your sudden military action suggests a return to the aggressive policies of the Covenant War era."
Elena watched Torres's face carefully.
She'd heard stories about the Covenant Wars, the conflict that had established humanity as a major galactic power before their sudden withdrawal. But Torres had been there, had commanded fleets in battles that were still studied in military academies across the galaxy. "The Covenant Wars ended when we chose to end them," Torres said quietly. "We withdrew not because we were weak, but because we were strong enough to choose peace. We've spent 3 centuries building, growing, preparing. We hoped we'd never need to use what we've built." He gestured toward the tactical displays, showing the rescued civilians being evacuated to medical ships. "But we will always protect our own, and anyone under our protection. That's not expansionism, Administrator. That's duty." "Your fleet strength suggests preparation for something far larger than defensive operations," Pelmoth pressed. "Our intelligence estimates put your current force at nearly 300 capital ships, with support elements that could supply a full-scale military campaign." Torres smiled, and Elena felt a chill run down her spine. It was the smile of a predator who had just realized how thoroughly his opponents had misunderstood the situation. 300 ships, Torres repeated. "Administrator, that's just the response fleet. We woke up 300 ships to deal with the slave ring." He turned to face the delegation fully. "How many ships do you think we'd wake up if someone actually threatened our core worlds?" The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of electronics and the distant sounds of the rescue operation. Elena could see the delegates' various forms of body language all expressing the same emotion: fear. They were beginning to understand just how badly they had miscalculated humanity's capabilities. "The Terran Defense Force maintains exactly as many ships as we need to protect what we consider ours," Torres continued. "Right now, that includes every being who was stolen from Kepler, 442b, and every being who's been processed through Zephyrian slave markets. We're going to find them, free them, and ensure this never happens again." "You're talking about military action across multiple star systems," Zethara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm talking about justice," Torres replied, "something the galactic community seems to have forgotten while we were sleeping." Elena's comm unit crackled with an update from the rescue teams. The evacuation was proceeding ahead of schedule, with all surviving prisoners secured aboard human medical vessels. The Zephyrian database downloads were complete. revealing a network of slavery operations that spanned dozens of systems. Torres received the same update and nodded grimly. Gentle beings, I suggest you return to your respective governments and inform them that humanity is resuming active participation in galactic affairs, not as conquerors or aggressors, but as guardians of those who cannot protect themselves. He turned to Elena. Captain, prepare the fleet for departure. We have more slaves to free. As the delegates filed out with varying degrees of haste, Elena couldn't help but smile. The galaxy had grown comfortable during humanity's long sleep, believing that the Deathworlders had been tamed by civilization. They were about to learn how wrong they'd been. The Zephyrian hegemony's capital world of Vex-Harath had never known the touch of enemy weapons. For 800 years, it had served as the commercial and military heart of one of the galaxy's most successful criminal enterprises, its orbital shipyards producing the sleek vessels that carried slaves to markets across a dozen sectors. High Admiral Kethmore stood in the war room of the Primary Command Citadel, his massive frame casting shadows across tactical displays that painted an increasingly desperate picture. In the 72 hours since the Tartarus Prime incident, 17 hegemony facilities had gone dark. Not destroyed, simply empty. Their populations vanished. Their databases wiped clean. The humans weren't just rescuing slaves. They were systematically dismantling the entire Zephyrian slave trade infrastructure. Report, Kethmore commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a being who had climbed to power through 3 centuries of warfare and political manipulation. War leader Sithak approached with the nervous gait of someone delivering bad news to a superior known for his violent temper. High Admiral, we've lost contact with the Meridian Processing Center, the Omega Harvesting Station, and the entire 7th Fleet Patrol Group. Intelligence suggests the humans are operating with at least 5 separate task forces, each one more powerful than our most optimistic force projections. Kethmore's claws extended involuntarily as stress pheromones flooded his system. 5 task forces. The intelligence reports from Tartarus Prime had suggested the humans possessed 300 ships. If they were operating 5 separate fleets, how many ships are we facing? He asked quietly. Conservative estimates put their total force strength at over 1,500 capital vessels, Sithak replied, his voice barely above a whisper. High Admiral, this isn't a rescue operation. This is a full-scale military campaign. 1,500 ships. Kethmore's mind reeled at the implications. The entire hegemony navy numbered fewer than 400 vessels, and those were spread across 50 star systems. The humans had effectively deployed 4 times the hegemony's total military strength for what they claimed was a simple rescue mission. What does fleet intelligence say about their objectives? The humans are following our supply chains, Sithak explained, calling up a holographic display of the local galactic arm. Red markers indicated hegemony facilities that had been hit, while yellow markers showed installations that had simply been abandoned by their crews. They're not just freeing current slaves, they're tracking down everyone who was ever processed through our markets.
The display showed a pattern that made Kethmore's blood chill.
The humans weren't attacking randomly or even strategically. They were following paper trails, financial records, shipping manifests. Somehow, they had gained access to the hegemony's entire operational database and were using it to unravel 3 centuries of criminal enterprise. How? Kethmore demanded. How did they get our operational data? The Tartarus Prime downloads, High Admiral. Before Overlord Vexthak could implement security protocols, the humans had copied everything. Every transaction, every ship movement, every slave market contact for the past 50 years. A new voice cut through the war room's tense atmosphere. High Admiral, incoming transmission on the military command frequency. It's the humans. Kethmore felt his scales prickle with anticipation and dread. Throughout this campaign, the human forces had operated in complete communication silence, striking with precision and vanishing before the hegemony could respond. For them to make contact now suggested something significant was about to change. Put it through, he commanded. The main display flickered to life, revealing the interior of what was clearly a human command bridge. The being who faced them was tall, even by Deathworlder standards, with the kind of presence that spoke of absolute authority. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to commanding fleets. High Admiral Kethmore, I am Admiral Marcus Torres of the Terran Defense Force. I believe we need to discuss terms. Kethmore drew himself up to his full 7-foot height, his ceremonial armor reflecting the war room's lighting. Admiral Torres, you have conducted unprovoked attacks on hegemony facilities and violated our sovereign territory. This is an act of war. Torres's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested he found Kethmore's bravado amusing. "Hi, Admiral. You kidnapped 50,000 beings from a peaceful colony and sold them into slavery. By any civilized definition, you're the one who committed an act of war. Those beings were harvested according to ancient hegemony law. Ancient hegemony law doesn't supersede galactic sapient rights legislation," Torres interrupted smoothly. "But we're not here to debate legal theory. We're here to discuss the return of every being your organization has stolen, sold, or processed in the past 50 years. Kethmore felt his jaw drop. 50 years? Admiral, that could be millions of beings across hundreds of star systems. The logistical impossibility alone is our problem to solve, not yours," Torres finished. "Hi, Admiral. Let me be very clear about your situation. In the past 3 days, we've recovered detailed records of every transaction your organization has conducted since your databases were digitized. We know where every ship went, who bought what, and how your entire network operates." The tactical display behind Torres showed a real-time map of human fleet movements, and Kethmore felt his heart skip several beats. There weren't 5 task forces. There were 23 separate fleet elements moving through hegemony space like a coordinated swarm of predators. "We're not just dismantling your slave trade," Torres continued relentlessly. "We're following every chain of custody, tracking down every being you've sold, and ensuring they're returned to their families or provided with new homes if they choose. This operation will continue until every single slave has been freed." "The economic impact alone would destabilize dozens of star systems," Sithak interjected, his voice cracking with stress. "Admiral, you're talking about collapsing entire sectors of the galactic economy." Torres's smile was cold as vacuum. "War leader, any economy built on slavery deserves to collapse, but you raise an interesting point about economic impact. Hi, Admiral. Your organization's assets are being systematically seized to fund the repatriation efforts." On cue, alerts began flashing across the war room's communication boards. Automated banking systems reported massive withdrawals from hegemony accounts. Shipping companies found their vessels impounded by human boarding parties. Trade stations discovered their docking bays occupied by human military personnel. "This is impossible," Kethmore whispered, watching centuries of accumulated wealth vanish in real time. "This is the consequence of underestimating Deathworlders," Torres replied. "Hi, Admiral. Humanity has had 300 years to prepare for this conversation. We've built the infrastructure, trained the personnel, and developed the technology necessary to end the slave trade permanently. You cannot simply rewrite galactic politics through military action," Kethmore snarled, his diplomatic facade cracking under the strain. "We're not rewriting galactic politics," Torres said patiently. "We're enforcing existing law that your organization chose to ignore. The Galactic Cooperation Treaty explicitly prohibits slavery. The Sapient Rights Declaration makes trading in intelligent beings a crime against civilization. You've been operating in violation of galactic law for centuries while everyone looked the other way." Torres leaned forward slightly, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "That ends now. Hi, Admiral. You have 24 hours to begin releasing any slaves still under hegemony control and to provide complete cooperation with our repatriation efforts. After that, we stop asking nicely." The transmission cut off, leaving the war room in stunned silence. Around Kethmore, his staff exchanged glances that ranged from terror to desperate calculation. The humans had just delivered an ultimatum that would effectively end the Zephyrian hegemony as a political and economic entity.
"Hi, Admiral."
Sithak said quietly. "Our military analysts estimate we could maybe delay their operations for a few days at best. Their technological advantages are substantial." Kethmore turned to study the tactical displays showing human fleet positions. The Deathworlders had deployed forces that dwarfed anything the galaxy had seen since the Covenant Wars, and they were using them with surgical precision. Each strike was calculated not just for military effect, but for maximum impact on the slave trade infrastructure. "What are our options?" he asked quietly. "Unconditional surrender," replied the hegemony's chief strategic analyst, War Leader Creshful. "Hi, Admiral. Continuing resistance will only result in the complete destruction of our civilization. The humans have demonstrated restraint so far. They've been careful to minimize casualties among our military personnel. But if we force them to escalate," Creshful called up historical data from the Covenant Wars, showing the aftermath of human military campaigns against species that had chosen to fight to the bitter end. The hegemony's intelligence services had studied these conflicts extensively, but seeing the raw data in the context of their current situation, made the implications terrifyingly clear. They won't just defeat us, Crashful continued. They'll ensure we never have the capability to threaten anyone again. High Admiral, this isn't a war we can win. This isn't even a war we can survive. Kethmore closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 8 centuries of hegemony power crumbling around him. The slave trade hadn't just been their business. It had been their culture, their way of life, the foundation of everything they had built. The humans were asking them to surrender not just their military forces, but their entire civilization. But the alternative was extinction. Send a message to all hegemony facilities, he commanded, his voice heavy with defeat. Begin immediate release of all slaves. Cooperation with human forces is now mandatory. Any unit that resists will be considered in violation of direct orders from High Command. As his staff scrambled to implement the surrender orders, Kethmore continued to watch the tactical display showing human fleet movements. 23 separate task forces, operating with the kind of coordination that spoke of centuries of planning and preparation. The galaxy had assumed humanity's withdrawal meant they had become weak, or perhaps simply lost interest in galactic affairs. Instead, they had been building something unprecedented, a military force capable of enforcing humanitarian law across multiple star systems simultaneously. The age of slavery was ending, and the Deathworlders were writing its epitaph in letters of fire across the void. The only question now was whether the Zephyrian hegemony would survive to see what came next. Outside the Command Citadel's viewing ports, the first human ships appeared in Vex Harith's orbital space. Massive dreadnoughts that had crossed the galaxy to bring justice to those who thought themselves beyond its reach. The sleeping giant was fully awake now, and the universe would never be the same. 6 months after the Tartarus Prime incident, Dr. Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Terran medical ship Hippocrates, watching the final stages of the largest humanitarian operation in galactic history. Through the reinforced transparisteel, she could see dozens of ships from various species working together in ways that would have been unthinkable before the hegemony's collapse. The operation to track down and repatriate the millions of beings processed through Zephyrian slave markets had become a galaxy-wide effort, but it was the humans who had made it possible. Their technological advantages, combined with their absolute refusal to accept half measures, had transformed what could have been a diplomatic nightmare into a coordinated rescue mission spanning 47 star systems. The integration programs are showing remarkable success rates, reported Dr. Nguyen, Marcus Reed, as he joined Sarah at the viewing port. Even the beings who suffered extensive psychological conditioning are responding to treatment. Your people's neural regeneration technology is quite literally giving them their lives back. Sarah smiled at the phrase, your people. 6 months ago, she had been a simple colonial administrator overseeing mining operations. Now she found herself serving as a liaison between the rescued populations and their human liberators, helping coordinate the massive effort to rebuild shattered lives. It's not just the technology, she said quietly. It's the approach. The humans aren't just treating symptoms. They're addressing the fundamental trauma of being stripped of agency, of being turned into property. Through the ship's communication system, they could hear updates from repatriation teams across the galaxy. The scope of the operation defied easy comprehension. Nearly 4 million beings had been recovered from active slave markets, with millions more traced through historical records and returned to their families or offered new homes in systems that welcomed refugees. The economic disruption had been massive. Entire sectors of the galactic economy had collapsed overnight as businesses built on slave labor found themselves without workers. That the humans had been prepared for this as well, offering technological assistance and economic aid to help affected systems transition to ethical labor practices. Dr. Chen, incoming communication from Admiral Torres, announced the ship's AI. He's requesting your presence on the command deck. Sarah made her way through the ship's corridors, still marveling at the casual efficiency of human technology. The Hippocrates was technically a hospital ship, but it was larger than most species' capital vessels and equipped with manufacturing capabilities that could produce anything from medical supplies to construction equipment. Admiral Torres stood at the center of the command deck, surrounded by holographic displays showing the status of repatriation efforts across the galaxy. At 63, he looked remarkably young for his age, a combination of Deathworlder genetics and advanced medical technology that had kept him vital despite 3 centuries of intermittent cryogenic suspension. Dr. Chen, he said with genuine warmth. I wanted to personally thank you for your work with the integration committees. The feedback from the rescued populations has been overwhelmingly positive. I should be thanking you, Admiral, Sarah replied. 6 months ago, my people were facing lives of slavery or worse. Now they're free, healthy, and many of them are helping with the rescue efforts. Torres nodded toward one of the displays showing the latest statistics. 4.7 million beings recovered, with less than 3% choosing not to return to their homeworlds. The psychological support networks you've helped establish have made the difference between rescue and true liberation. But Sarah could see something in the Admiral's expression that suggested this wasn't simply a social call. What's troubling you, Admiral? Torres gestured toward a different set of displays, showing galactic political movements. The Galactic Cooperation Treaty Council is calling for a formal review of human military capabilities. Several major powers are expressing concern about the implications of our technological advantages. Sarah studied the displays, seeing reports from across the galaxy that painted a complex picture. Some species were grateful for humanity's intervention and were actively cooperating with ongoing rescue efforts. Others seemed to view the humans' sudden display of power as a potential threat to the existing galactic order. They're afraid, Sarah observed. Not of what you've done, but of what you could do. Exactly, Torres confirmed. For 3 centuries, galactic politics operated on the assumption that no single species possessed the power to unilaterally enforce policy across multiple star systems. Our intervention has shattered that assumption. On one of the communication channels, they could hear Ambassador Zethara of the Altarian Trade Council addressing what sounded like a diplomatic assembly. While we applaud the humanitarian goals of the Terran intervention, we must address the precedent it sets. If any species with sufficient military power can simply impose their values on others, Torres muted the channel with a gesture that suggested he'd heard variations of this argument many times before. The fundamental question is whether we return to the shadows and let galactic politics revert to their previous state, or whether we accept a more active role in maintaining interstellar law. Sarah considered this carefully. She'd spent months working with beings who had suffered under the previous system, a galaxy where slavery was technically illegal, but practically tolerated as long as the perpetrators were discreet about it. The human intervention had saved millions of lives, but it had also demonstrated that the existing galactic government structures were fundamentally inadequate. What does Earth's government say? She asked. Torres's smile carried a hint of irony. Earth's government is still adjusting to the fact that we exist. The colonial expansion programs and the Defense Force have operated with considerable autonomy for centuries. The home system lost contact with most of our operations during the retreat from galactic politics. This was news to Sarah. She had assumed that the massive rescue fleets represented the full power of a unified human civilization. You mean Earth doesn't know about the scope of your capabilities? Earth knows we have defensive fleets and colonial settlements, Torres explained. They don't know we've spent 3 centuries building a civilization that spans 200 star systems and possesses manufacturing capabilities that could outfit a dozen species worth of military forces. The implications were staggering.
Oh.
Humanity hadn't just retreated from galactic politics, they had quietly become the most powerful single force in the galaxy, while everyone else thought they were hiding in isolation. And they had done it so gradually and carefully that even their own homeworld didn't understand the full scope of what they had accomplished. So what happens now? Sarah asked. Before Torres could answer, alerts began flashing across the command deck's displays. A new situation was developing in the Rigel sector. Reports of another large-scale slaving operation, this one run by a coalition of criminal organizations that had moved to fill the vacuum left by the hegemony's collapse. Now, Torres said grimly, we finish what we started. He turned to address the command crew. All ships prepare for hyperspace transit to the Rigel sector. Relay the situation to Fleet 7 through 12 and request coordination for a joint operation. Sarah watched the efficient bustle of activity as the rescue fleet prepared for another mission. Around them, hundreds of ships began the complex dance of formation, flying necessary for safe hyperspace travel. Medical ships, construction vessels, diplomatic craft, and yes, the sleek predatory forms of military dreadnoughts that could reduce planets to rubble if necessary. Dr. Chen, Torres said as the first ships began disappearing into hyperspace. I'd like you to consider taking a position with the colonial administration. We're going to need people who understand both the human perspective and the needs of the beings we're rescuing. Sarah looked out at the fleet arrayed around them, a force capable of reshaping galactic civilization through careful application of overwhelming power and genuine compassion. 6 months ago, she had been a simple administrator on a mining world. Now she was being offered a chance to help guide humanity's emergence as the galaxy's reluctant policeman. What exactly are you offering, Admiral? A chance to help build something new, Torres replied. The old galactic order failed because it lacked the will to enforce its own laws. We've proven that enforcement is possible. Now we need to prove that it can be done justly, compassionately, and in cooperation with the species we're trying to protect. Through the viewing port, Sarah could see the last of the rescue ships making the jump to hyperspace. In the Rigel sector, criminal organizations were about to learn the same lesson the Zephyrian hegemony had learned, that some species were not content to let evil flourish in the darkness between stars. "The sleeping giant is awake," she murmured, remembering her desperate moments in the Tartarus Prime cell. "And it's not going back to sleep," Torres confirmed. "The question is whether the galaxy will accept humanity as a guardian of interstellar law, or whether we'll be forced to impose order through strength alone." Sarah thought of the millions of beings who had been freed from slavery, the families reunited across dozens of star systems, the children who would grow up free because humans had decided that some crimes were too great to ignore. The galaxy was changing, whether it wanted to or not. "Admiral," she said finally, "I accept your offer, but I have one condition." "Name it." "When we're done with the slavers, when every being has been freed, and every criminal organization dismantled, we don't stop there. We help build something better. A galactic community that doesn't need overwhelming force to maintain justice because justice is built into its foundation." Torres extended his hand, and Sarah shook it firmly. Outside, the stars beckoned with the promise of more worlds to liberate, more wrongs to right, and more chances to prove that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe was the simple refusal to let evil triumph. The distress signal from Kepler 442b had awakened more than just a fleet. It had awakened humanity's conscience, and the galaxy would never be the same. In the depths of space, construction ships were already beginning work on the first of a new type of installation, not weapons platforms or military bases, but centers of learning and cooperation where species could work together to solve problems before they required military intervention. The age of slavery was ending. The age of true galactic cooperation was about to begin. And at its heart were the Deathworlders who had proven that the most terrifying thing in the universe wasn't their capacity for violence. It was their absolute refusal to accept injustice, no matter how well established or profitable it might be. The sleeping giant had awakened, and it had chosen to be humanity's conscience made manifest among the stars.